A little more than 60 years have passed since the end of the Holocaust. The events of the Holocaust were so tragic, so gruesome, so overwhelmingly heartbreaking that often we choose not to think about them, prefer not to remember. And yet, we must remember what happened to 6 million of our people during those tragic years. It is our duty to remember in order to sanctify the lives of those who perished. It is our duty to remember in order to ensure that the kind of evil perpetrated by the Nazis can never occur again. In another decade, or perhaps two, there will no longer be among us any survivors of the Holocaust to provide first-hand accounts of what they witnessed and what they suffered. This project is a means of ensuring that those accounts will not be lost nor completely erased. It is vitally important that those who survived the Holocaust and the liberators of the death camps have the opportunity to share in their own words what they experienced so that future generations will not forget. It is a sacred act for them. It is a sacred act for us to remember. The Holocaust Education Committee of Temple Sinai has undertaken this project, and it is our hope that in creating this DVD and in presenting it to those young people who celebrate Bar and Bat Mitzvah in our congregation, that they will come to understand that the only response to the Shoah, the Holocaust, can be the continuation of Jewish life. As these young men and women prepare to take on the responsibilities of being Jewish, we hope that they will equally understand the responsibility of remembering this tragic period in our people's history.
How did your faith play a role in your survival?
When you saw your synagogue on fire, how did you feel? What came across your mind?
What was your most vivid memory of the Holocaust?
Why do you feel the need to tell your story?
After the Holocaust, did you feel more religious or less?
When you were at the train station
Whatever
with
happened to your mom's family?
What did you feel when you saw the
Why are
No
you willing
Jews
to
Allowed
talk
sign?
about your experience?
What was your worst experience at Auschwitz? What enabled you to survive?
I
didn't want to die. I hadn't lived life at all. This was my chance. If I could just hang on another day, another week, a few months, make it to liberation. I want to live.
We had to march through snow and ice and with very little clothing.
To be honest with you, we were praying for the armies to advance towards Berlin because for us there was liberation.
One of the darkest periods in Jewish history occurred before and during the Second World War. Germany was in a major depression. The country was being punished for its role in World War I. Looking for relief, the German people turned to a new leader.
His name, Adolf Hitler. Hitler blamed Germany's problems on minorities. He attacked people who were not in the Aryan race.
This included gypsies, communists, gays, and Jews. By 1933, Hitler's Nazi Party had passed the Nuremberg laws against these minorities.
Jews were not allowed to vote or even interact with Aryans. Jewish businesses were boycotted. A terrible event occurred on November 9, 1938.
On this night, synagogues were burned, Torahs and books destroyed, and Jewish men were arrested. They called this night Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. This is when the Shoah, or the Holocaust, began.
War started in September 1939. Poland was invaded, and that country's Jews became oppressed. They were forced to live in ghettos. Many died of starvation, disease, and Nazi brutality.
The same occurred in other countries: Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, Russia, France, Holland, Denmark, and others. In 1942, Hitler instituted his final solution. He would exterminate his enemies, primarily the Jews.
Death camps were established. They had names like Chelmo,
Belzec,
Sobibor,
Treblinka,
Auschwitz,
Buchenwald,
Mauthausen,
Dachau, and Sachsenhausen.
2/3 of the Jewish population of the entire world perished. 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, died.
Fortunately, the war turned in favor of the United States and its allies. As Allied troops moved in victory across Europe, they encountered Nazi concentration camps. Liberation of the Jews finally came in 1945.
Anneliese Nussbaum is a survivor of the Holocaust.
Anneliese was born in 1929 in the eastern part of Germany. Her father was a teacher and cantor. While in elementary school, she remembered seeing colorful parades, but she soon understood these parades were put on by the Nazis. What was your most vivid memory of the Holocaust?
I think the night in Auschwitz, when I really lost my faith and questioned God. Briefly, I had a very difficult afternoon because people outside our barracks had been shot, and we were so concerned that we would be asked to go out and be the next ones to be shot. We were in shock, basically, medically speaking. But then evening came around, and we were on those bunks, and I had absolutely nothing. Wood, period. Like I said before, my mother was sick, and some people had a little bit of burlap. So I went to the person who was in charge, and I asked her if I could have some burlap, and she said no. And I kept arguing with her. I still had a little bit of spunk left at that point because I had just come from Theresienstadt, arguing, and she hit me. And I hit her back, which is something I should never, ever have done. And she was telling me at that point, if your parents haven't taught you anything, then I will. And which totally outraged me. And she made me kneel down. Now, I came from a religious family. We Jews do not kneel down except for Yom Kippur. My mother called my name and she let me go. And I went back to my bunk. And at that moment, I felt, where is God now? Everything that I had done all my life, where I had been so religious and so faithful, nothing was worth at that point, and I had to kneel.
Franklin Lewinson is a survivor of the Holocaust. Franklin was born in Berlin, Germany in 1935. His father was a banker. His mother converted to Judaism before she was married. She became a legal secretary and used her maiden name to avoid the Nazis.
Why are you willing to talk about your experience now, but not before?
The reason I'm willing to tell my story at this time is because the young people in this congregation should know something about the Holocaust. And I think it's a very good educational tool for the Hebrew school here to have this on record and to use it in future years. That's why I've made an exception telling the story at this time.
Edith Milner is a survivor of the Holocaust.
Edith was born in Czechoslovakia. Eventually, the city she lived in was occupied by the Nazis. The Jews were driven into a ghetto.
Did you go to school in the ghetto?
No, in the ghetto, and our ghetto it didn't last very long. It only lasted a couple of weeks. And actually school was over for me before, even before the ghetto, before we went into the ghetto, because many of the schools were occupied with soldiers. The war had started and the schools were occupied with soldiers. I have to tell you that my very last day in school, I had to wear a yellow star. And when I came to class, and I had good friends in my class, and one of the young girls came over to me, not Jewish, and started hugging me and started crying. And she knew more about what was going to happen to me than I did.
Annalise started to see signs in public places that said, "No Jews allowed." She recalls Kristallnacht, the so-called Night of Broken Glass. That night, the synagogue where her father sang burned in a fire. The sights and sounds of hate began to fill her childhood. She was forced to wear the Judenstern, a Jewish star, everywhere she went. She felt ashamed.
What did you feel when you saw the No Jews Allowed signs?
Well, I had already been prepared a little bit to the very fact that the laws, the Nuremberg laws in 1935, changed our status as citizens in Germany. So I knew things weren't quite right. I felt they didn't want us. What kind of category are we in this society? I had been able to go to the store before, and all of a sudden, we were no longer allowed to go in. Why? I questioned that. What was wrong? Was there something wrong with me? And there was another sign. There was another sign in some of the parks that say, "No dogs or Jews allowed." Had I been reduced to the category of an animal? In their eyes, yes, but not in my own eyes. And it was depressing. It was.
When he was 6, Franklin's father was arrested by the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police. He had gone out of the house for a walk against the wishes of Franklin's mother. Franklin's father was sent to Auschwitz and was never heard from again.
How did you move about the street freely when you went to the Berlin Zoo to your apartment in 1944 to 1945?
If you have ever been to New York City, you should know that Berlin was a very, very large city. There were many, many people on the streets, and my mother had her former identity papers before she converted, so that she felt fairly safe walking in the streets. Of course, she had to remove our stars, yellow stars, before we left the house. And you normally wouldn't see an adult going over to a child and talking to the child before speaking to the parent. So my mother took a calculated risk that that wouldn't happen. And there was some luck involved too, because you would never know if there were agents on the street or whether people were at the train station stopping everyone for identity cards.
In 1944, at the age of 15, Edith, her parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters were deported to the Auschwitz death camp. Only she and her father survived the Nazis.
Later that year, Edith, with 2 cousins and other women, were forced to work in a German munitions factory. They worked in a number of other factories over the next 6 months.
By April 1945, she ended up in Hamburg, Germany. A teenager, she weighed only about 70 pounds.
What were the munition factories like? What were its conditions?
Well, I worked in several munition factories. The first one was a regular factory building, but the only problem was that we were housed about 4 miles away, and 1944-1945 winter was probably the worst winter, or one of the worst winters in Europe. And we had to march through snow and ice, and with very little clothing. And in fact, the only way we were able to sort of ward off the cold was by wrapping ourselves in newspaper, and also put newspaper into our stockings and in our shoes in order to be able to make it. The conditions within the factory were, well, like a normal factory. The only thing is that we work shifts, so it all depended on what shift you were, whether you were on the night shift or the day shift, and that's what you did.
Annalise's family was forced out of their own apartment and into a convent. They lived in isolation until one day they were forced to leave. Their destination, Theresian, a concentration camp. Then to the death camp, Auschwitz, where conditions were inhuman.
What enabled you to survive?
I think what enabled me to survive was the very fact that during the last 7 months, especially, I had my mother with me. I had her support, the emotional support. I was able to curl up to her at night, and since she had the tuberculosis, she always had the temperature, and she felt warm, and it was this cozy, comfortable togetherness compared to other people who were there all by themselves. I was also a teenager in a little bit better health and a little bit more self-centered, as teenagers are at that point. And it gave me a great will to live. I didn't want to die. I hadn't lived life at all. This was my chance, if I could just hang on another day, another week, a few months, make it to liberation. I want to live. I want to experience the world. I was born into this world. I wanted to know what it was like. I think, and of course, pure luck that I didn't get shot or was sent to the gas chamber, which I was very, very, very close to twice. That's what helped me to survive.
Franklin's mother was a risk taker. When he was 8, she took him to a farm in the country outside of Berlin. The farm belonged to one of Franklin's aunts. As conditions got worse, Franklin spent more and more time there hiding. When you were at your uncle and aunt's farm, did you feel safe?
I would say yes. I usually felt very safe there because we were able to go outside and play. And the only thing I didn't like about it was that whenever we came there, they had geese and chickens and other animals, and the geese always used to chase after me. And I hated that. And I was just frightened. But otherwise, I felt very safe. And we also many times went out into the potato fields in the fall after the harvest.